Be on the lookout for they. Who's they? Well, I'll tell you who they is. If you're in the maintenance department, it's the engineering department. If you're in management, it's the union. If you're in the union, it's the management. If you're at home, it's your sister, your brother, or your mom or your dad.
Right.
So to me, very easily, two active signals of accountability is be on the lookout for it's not my job or the infamous they. Because I'm not sure who they is. I do know this. They isn't me. Right? They's not me.
This sounds like a who's on, what's the baseball?
Yeah, Laurel and Hardy. Who's
on first?
Welcome to another edition of the ABD Leadership Podcast, a collection of CSRA thought leaders providing insight to help your company survive and thrive. Here's Augusta Business Daily publisher, Neil Gordon.
We like to begin with good deeds, and Locks for Lucas was a campaign started about 11 years ago by Robin Kelly. Robin owns Trend Salon on the Riverwatch Parkway. To date, her efforts and the efforts of all of her stylists in the community has raised more than $100,000 for the families of 6 children. And here in 2021, she's trying to raise a whole lot of money for Mason, a 5-year-old who has cancer. Here's how you can help. Many businesses like Sparkle Car Wash and AR Workshop and others have donated raffle tickets. Spend some money, go into the salon, and then at the end, Mason's family will have a whole lot of money. That's your good deed for today. For more business news, please visit AugustaBusinessDaily.com. Well, meet Coach Darin over here, Darin Myers with Tab CSRA, and I'm Neil Gordon with Augusta Business Daily. How are you, sir?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on, and we're so excited that we're going to do coaching for people and help them navigate through things going on at work and with their companies and such. And the topic of today's is it's not my job, and we're going to talk a little bit about accountability. But before we get started, we should backtrack a little bit. Tell us the last 30 years of your life. Tell us a little bit about what you did.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And you're right. The last 30 years, I've been in the nuclear power industry, electric power industry. Prior to that, I was a Navy submariner for 7 years, but I will just say largely commercial nuclear power. Led a large organizations, probably up to 1,000 people. Capital and operating budgets of exceeding into the hundreds of millions of dollars, and been doing a large part of that. Before I retired out of the industry, I was the plant manager and a site VP at a fairly large nuclear power plant that employed a lot of people.
Absolutely. And, we can mention that you work with the Southern Company and you work with Plant Vogtle. Now, which of the Plant Vogtle operations?
I was on Vogtle 1 and 2, which was the operating units.
Okay.
And they were the one making cash at this point.
Okay, so then you weren't the one with...
I wasn't with
There's
3
been
and
delays
4.
here, but...
Yeah, I don't know much about that, and frankly, rather not talk about that.
Not. So as you transitioned out, what I find fascinating about you coaching others is that you've rolled up the sleeves and you're in not only one business, but 2 businesses.
Right. Well, when I left, I had the opportunity to maybe go play nuclear power somewhere else in the country, and just loved the area that we were living in, and made the family decision really to stay put here in Augusta in the Aiken area. And my daughter, who has been in home healthcare or in healthcare for a large part of her life, COVID came along, and we really made a decision and came to an intersection in life where we decided to do business together. And so I'm having the opportunity to run a business with my daughter now. And secondly, been doing some coaching and consulting and peer advisory boards with the alternative boards, TAB for short, and really getting a lot out of that as well. So,
sure.
Yeah, maybe slightly definition of insanity, starting 2 businesses at the same time. But things are going well.
But you can empathize with others that are part of your TAB group, which is great.
Absolutely. In fact, I would tell you, what I've learned quickly, my whole career has been large corporations and large teams. But as I engage and interact with within my own company, which clearly at this point is small, or with businesses that I have on my boards and tab, there's a lot of similarity. I mean, a lot. And I would tell you more than half of it comes down to people.
Sure.
And it seems like that's what we talk a lot about in the boards.
Absolutely. And we're continuing to chat with Darin Myers, and tabcsra.com is the website. Darin mentioned working with his daughter, and future podcasts, we're even going to delve into the layers of family issues and also successes, the joys and challenges of working with family members. But today, we really want to focus on accountability. And you often hear, and I cringe whenever I work like a television news station, where a reporter was asked to go carry the tripod and help and take a little bit of video. That's not my job. How do you feel about that statement?
Well, I've heard that 1,000 times myself. And, at the plant, I learned that, leadership, teamwork, culture, employee development, and engagement, all very important. But I would put accountability of performance with the team right there with all those important attributes as well. I won't prioritize them, but I could argue, frankly, that having an organization of accountability, good accountability culture would be something I would consider very important. And I've learned that the accountability can be of your own performance. When you think of accountability, I think a lot of people think of it as in terms of punitive. Hey, I'm going to hold you accountable. Mm-hmm. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, are you accountable for your performance and taking enough ownership that you're accountable for your own team's performance? And so the comment of "it's not my job" should really stand out as that's frankly not what you want to hear if you're striving to have an accountability culture. I think it's extremely important. It's a huge force multiplier that if you have 800 employees and you only have 30 people being accountable, saying "it's not my job," you're not getting the most out of your assets that you possibly can. So I would just tell the listeners and business owners, small or large, how important having an accountability culture is and having that team performance.
And doesn't that even start at home? I mean, if you think about the tasks that we have to do, the kids with chores and the husbands and the wives, I know it's ingrained in me.
Yeah.
Mondays and Thursdays is when the trash gets picked up.
Yeah. Well, I think you use that because you've heard me give that speech before. But I think when I talk to people about accountability, I always got a kick out of the fact that they didn't think I was talking to them. I was talking to the person to the left or the right of them.
Yeah.
It wasn't them, but they were certainly, go get them, Darin. You're spot on. That person to the left or right of me really needs to step up on their ownership. But I think it applies at home as well. And I think the analogy that I've used is the trash can analogy, that if the trash can is overfloweth in the kitchen and you have a family of 5, what could it possibly be that you may hear if you ask someone to take out the trash? And I would tell you one of the ones that you probably was, "it's not my job."
Sure.
Not my job. Or you may hear, "well, I did it last time."
Yeah.
Right? And, to me, that's a warning sign that, hey, you're not necessarily you're owning the trash for the family as much as you maybe should.
My favorite is, "I'll do it in the morning."
Right.
Because really, what our boss and what our spouse wants is to ensure that it is done properly early enough so that there's no possible mistake.
Right. That's right. There's 2 things, I like to tell people I ask, how's your team or your organization when it comes to accountability? And often I think people give their teams high marks, but when I start asking them questions, I think slowly over time they start to their grade goes down on their own team. So not my job, how often you hear it's not my job, I think is a really good indicator of just how accountable your team and your team players may be. Here's another one, they. Be on the lookout for they. Who's they? I'll tell you who they is. If you're in the maintenance department, it's the engineering department. If you're in management, it's the union. If you're in the union, it's the management. If you're at home, it's your sister, your brother, or your mom or your dad.
Right.
So to me, very easily, two active signals of accountability is be on the lookout for it's not my job or the infamous they. Because I'm not sure who they is. I do know this. They isn't me. Right? They's not me.
This sounds like a what's the baseball?
Yeah, Laurel and Hardy. Who's
on first?
Right. Yeah. Or what, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just wondering, for business owners watching this, any telltale signs that on the positive side that you feel an applicant could be self-disciplined enough to own their role and make people around them better.
Right. Yeah, one other thing before we go on, the passive, it's not my job and they is easy to detect. What's harder to detect is I didn't see it or I didn't see that, right? So let's go back to your trash can analogy. If you do pinpoint your son or your daughter and say, hey, do you see the trash? They could have seen it, but there's a good cop out. Well, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
And that's much harder to detect. I'm going to say that lack of accountability from a passive standpoint. So you certainly probably, many organizations, family units, small or large, will have that lack of accountability on a more passive front, and that's extremely hard to detect.
Oh, yeah. And I think I may have answered my own question because just full disclosure, I'm part of Darin's first board, and just we're going to share things over the next several weeks and months, and I really look forward to it, and I really enjoy it. But I remember about the first thing you did was you had me take a bit of a diagnostic test to determine who I am as a person and how I make decisions. And I wonder if that's a first step in determining whether someone takes responsibility for things.
Right. Well, I think any kind, there's certainly, I suspect, good organizations that have strong accountability. Yeah. They're fortunate. But I do think there's a lot of organizations out there that, one, maybe don't really know their weaknesses. And I wanted to point out the accountability piece because I got to tell you, it's just as I said earlier, a huge force multiplier when you have all people in your organization taking ownership of not only their performance, but equally important, their group's performance, their overall company's performance. Pick marketing. What if you happen to be a technician that's in the shop? How often would you hear from them about the website?
Right.
I mean, to me, technician coming into the front office on Monday morning and going, man, I just happened to be playing on my computer this week and I went past our website. Boy, that seems outdated. I mean, how easy would it be for the technician to say, not my job. I'm just going to go back and do my job back in the shop, and that website stuff is not a part of my job description. They,
yeah,
right. So it's all over the place, and it doesn't come easy. But my experience is once you do really get that culture of accountability, it is phenomenal on how well your team can do when you have all cylinders hitting, if you will, and it's very enjoyable to be a part of something like that. But it takes time.
It does take time, and over the course of time, in the next several weeks and months, we're going to look at a lot of different aspects. And up next for us will be skill or will.
Yeah, I talked about the categories of organizations, and I think employee development and engagement, but certainly when it comes to training, is something that I'm pretty got a lot of experience on and a strong advocate, but certainly there's some things we need to talk about. So I'm looking forward to skill or will.
For more information and to maybe read up on some blogs and some good tips for you and your company, you can certainly go to tabcsra.com. He is Darin Myers. Darin, thanks so much for the time.
Neil, I really appreciate you having me. Thanks.
The ABD podcast series is presented by Augusta Business Daily, Crosslink Consulting Services, Tab CSRA, and Best Office Solutions.
Well, they say there's no loyalty anymore with employees and local employers. As you know, the job shortage has been astronomical. How about Gary Gibson, though, of Gary's Hamburgers? He had to close the Wheeler Road location because his manager retired after a few decades of serving him. He had 5 employees, and he mentioned to them that he would welcome them with open arms at his Bel Air Road, Georgia Avenue, and Washington Road locations. All 5 said, yes, I'm going to come and work for you. And the retiring manager says, you know what? I'm also going to come part-time if you need me and float around to the other stores. That is loyalty in a tough economy. For more business news, we invite you to go to AugustaBusinessDaily.com. Welcome back. We're with Darin Myers again with TAB CSRA, the Alternative Board, a peer-to-peer advisory board. I'm Neil Gordon with Augusta Business Daily. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me.
Super. I actually recently just got back from, we're both members of the Augusta Metro Chamber of Commerce, and they had this third Thursday business builder, and Dennis O'Keefe from Workful spoke about how software might be able to make your lives easier at work and help with your clients and all of that. And it was great for me to get out of the office and learn. And I know that's been part of your life for decades in helping employees.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. As I mentioned in previous podcasts, teamwork, leadership, culture, employee engagement, and I'll say employee development. And I think you could spend hours on any of those topics. But when it comes to employee development, the nuclear industry certainly puts a lot of emphasis on training. And so I've even had a little bit of a training background during my 30 years in the industry. And so I start out this conversation with the fact that I'm a huge, big-time advocate of good training. I think but there's going to be a but here in a moment, and I think it's extremely important that you get the right employees, and then through your hiring process, but then you certainly take the time to make sure that they learn and understand the skills of the job. But at the end of the day, I think sometimes training is overused, and I really want to talk about that a little bit as well.
Absolutely. So we're theming this. Is it skill or is it will? And I'm assuming that has to do with whether somebody can do the job and whether you have the initiative to just do the job, or maybe you might need help.
Well,
right?
Actually, a little different, not necessarily. Let's start out with when you go to the doctor. I'm going to talk about this topic based on performance of an individual or performance of a team, and training maybe being a part of the solution. But before we go there, let's put it, in terms of a medical analogy. When you go to the doctor and you're not feeling well, what does the doctor do?
Well, he does a checkup.
And he maybe does blood work.
Sure.
Or her, does tests.
Yeah.
What are they trying to do?
They're trying to really ascertain if they're seeing some symptoms.
Yeah, they're trying to diagnose the issue.
Sure.
Are we dealing with a significant disease? Are we dealing with something minor? Are we dealing with diabetes, or are we dealing with heart disease? Because the course of action clearly on those two analyses would be different. It's no different in in business, in trying to figure out, why is my employee or my group performance not doing as well as I would like? And so, again, saying that I'm extremely a strong advocate of training, before you jump into the training being the solution, like the doctor, you want to go analyze what the problem is. Why is my performance not where it should be? And I think all too often it's easy to say, well, I'm going to go send a few of my people to training, or I'm going to give them some software training, or I'm going to go teach them how to run that lathe better. But all too often, they've inappropriately analyzed the situation.
Mm-hmm.
They go off and spend large amounts of money to what they hope is to solve the problem, but they may be going after the wrong problem. And so training is frankly one of the most expensive solutions out there, especially if you're talking about training vast numbers of people. So it comes down to the question of skill or will. Is if it's truly a skill, then that's largely probably training is going to be the solution. Mm-hmm. The will part of it is the other aspects that I'm challenging leaders and the listeners need to recognize, hey, before I just immediately jump to the solution, let me be my doctor of my own business, and let me take the time to do the analysis right to make sure I understand why our performance is not where it should be. And so doing that upfront work is extremely important. And I think all too often business leaders and other key decision makers sometimes forget that. It's almost like playing roulette. It's a shotgun approach. Let me just throw it on. Let me hope this training fixes my problem. And many times people are disappointed when they've spent a large amount of money and the performance or the lack thereof continues.
What might you recommend that employers do on the front end to try and target a little bit better?
That's a great question. I would tell you that's the analysis piece. And if you go and look at formal strategic, systematic processes to training, that's the first step that I'm emphasizing here. It's called analysis. Take the time, as much time as you need, to try to identify the problem that you have. And then once you have that problem identified, then you have a much better chance, or why that problem's existing, then you have a much better chance of getting the solution right. So things like, what could it be other than training? Well, or the skill of the employee. It may be the will of the employee, the attitude. But I don't want to put it on the employee. It's largely something bigger than that. Is it the culture of the organization? Are they doing largely what the culture of the organization's asking them to do? Is it the boss is distracting them? Is the procedures not right? Do you have poor processes? Is the software out of date? Maybe your hiring process was wrong and the individual was never onboarded appropriately to begin with. So there could be a litany of things that I will lump under the will piece versus the actual skill of the employee. So take the time to analyze the situation, things like talking to people, observing, and not making rash decisions that I think could produce the wrong, costly solution being implemented.
We're chatting here about training, employee engagement with Darin Myers. He's the local franchisee of TAB CSRA, and it's tabcsra.com. It's a peer advisory board, and I've gone through a little bit of training, and not only should the employees get training and be engaged, but the bosses need some training as well.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a quote out there, if you think you're this, as the leader, if you think you're in a room and you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. You know, if you're a good leader, the fact is you want to go attract the absolute best talent you can get. We're in football country, so do you know of any quarterback that doesn't want a phenomenally strong offensive line?
Well, I got to protect their hide.
Well, the point is, any leader, and we could argue the quarterback could be the lead, classified as the leader of the football team, right? So, in my mind, think of it in those terms. The quarterback wants the offensive line to be trained, skilled, and owns their performance and development as much as their own.
Yes, that's because they're a good leader and they gather everyone together. They're a team.
Absolutely. So translate that to the business owner or the leader or the key decision maker. They need to consider learning themselves. We're always going to be learning. And in fact, when you stop learning, that's to me a telltale sign of there's bigger problems. So I don't care how old you are, you're always going to be able to learn from somebody. You may have forgotten and need to relearn something. But I think it's important that the leaders lead by example, and developing their own skills, I think, is a great example of communicating to their employees how important it is to them as well.
Any positive examples out there of particular kinds of employee engagement, whether it be podcasts or books or seminars or workshops, or what seemed to work well for you when you managed, a number of people?
Well, it would be hard not to answer just the word communication, and just talk. There's a lot of people that claim they like to manage by walking around, and honestly, I did some of that. And I think in fact, I probably did a lot of it. Hallway banter, being in the lunchroom, talking to people, going to the shops and just chatting. I gained a lot of information through those conversations with my employees that was extremely valuable. So if I had to answer it, I would say communication, but the techniques of walking around, being someone that can be approached and chat with, a good listener, I think can really take a business leader a long, long way.
I remember sitting, I don't know if you've met Jeff Haddon, he runs Phoenix Printing, a long time. It's I think it's third generation, and brothers have been involved and so forth, and he's over 100 years, downtown Augusta. And he shared the same thing. He said every single day he makes it a point to go to wherever his employees are working, whether it be a cubicle, whether it be back on the printing presses, and he just takes their temperature every day. And coincidentally, they are one of the companies, you've heard of Glassdoor, of course, that has great reviews by employees. So maybe there's something to it.
Yeah, it's sort of funny. I'm going to talk the opposite of what often when it comes to TAB and our peer boards, one of the things I talk to potential board prospects is how often do you work on the business? Because my argument to them is all too often you're constantly working in the business, in the trenches, and you never step back and work on the business from time to time. Now, to me, that's balance, because I'm going to say just the opposite. If you're constantly just working on the business and never engaging people that are in the business, I think that could be equally damaging. So I think you need to certainly do both. But I always found it very effective to go talk to people and get I'll call it the heartbeat of the patient.
Yeah. Good medical analogies. Dr. Darin Myers with us today.
No, far from it. But it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And our next podcast, 6 heads are better than one, meaning we can't do it all alone as business owners. We all need help.
Absolutely.
And we're going to explore that. Again, tabcsra.com. And Darin, thanks again for the time.
No, I appreciate it, Neil. This has been fun. Thank you.
The ABD podcast series is presented by Augusta Business Daily, Crosslink Consulting Services, Tab CSRA, and Best Office Solutions.
Retta Farina is a super mom, a military mom. She and her husband moved to Augusta. He has a lifelong career in the military and settled here as a contractor over at Fort Gordon. Well, she is going to be opening up a retail store in Grovetown near the Gateway Shopping Center by the Aldi and such. You're not going to believe how much money she has generated just online in the last 9 years. Well, she has sold 1 million dog collars. The name of her company, let me get this right, Puddle Jumpers Pups. She sells the dog collars, which are very stylistic and carefully woven by hand by single moms across the country. She sells them for $23. She sold 1 million of them. Do the math. She's going to be successful, I think. Stop in and see her when she opens. And that's a look at an interesting business story across the CSRA. For much more, we invite you to go to our website, augustabusinessdaily.com. It's been said it's often good to have another pair of eyes take a look at what you're working on so that you can kind of see the forest from the trees as a business owner, if you will, working on your business, not necessarily in your business. We're with Darin Myers, who's the local franchisee of TAB CSRA, the alternative board. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Neil, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and boy, in your past career, 30 years in the nuclear industry, and you managed 1,000 people with Plant Vogel 1 and 2. Did you kind of have like outside eyes or a board of directors, if you will?
Is that a loaded question? No, I absolutely, and as you would expect that. Actually, probably I would say not just nuclear power. I would say large corporations often have that. Mm-hmm. But certainly I had a lot of differing eyes from the corporate level, my other peers at other sites, industry watch groups, if you will, that would come in from time to time and shed some light or their own thoughts and observations.
And so recently you took on the franchisee role, the Coach Darin. Mm-hmm. We call you. I'm actually one of about 6 people that are involved with Darin, and we help each other. It's why I say 6 heads are better than one. That's the part that I have enjoyed the most, is that my whole life was sales and content, but not necessarily running the business and coming up with pricing and so forth. So I have appreciated being part of TAB.
You know, large corporations, rightfully so, have board of directors, and they bring a lot of advantages. Obviously, they focus on strategic planning, hold their large company accountable, bring some diverse thought and experiences for direction and guidance to the company as a whole. But Neil, as you go down, smaller business owners don't typically have that luxury. So if I said, who is your board of directors, I may hear the word spouse.
Yeah.
I may hear the drinking buddy, golf partner. And that all may be good. And maybe, formally they would say my CPA.
Mm-hmm. Business attorney, maybe.
Potentially business attorney. But the concept is that none of us know it all and have some differing views and perspectives based on our title here. 6 heads are better than one. I think is extremely, extremely valuable. And that's what this peer-to-peer advisory group concept that the alternative board offers is very exciting.
What I found is interesting is that there is accountability, which we've talked about in a previous podcast, and there's a way to look at either your issues or your opportunities in real time and explain a little bit about the confidential nature and explain a little bit about how you can be helped through with what you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great question. First of all, we want it to be very formal. And we want it to be a very, very safe place. In other words, the business board member comes to the board feeling that they can talk about any issue. So we all sign non-disclosure agreements. We draw from non-competing sectors. So no matter how many boards I have here in the community, we're not going to have competitors on the same board, okay? And so that's our concept that we start with. That's very important. We give each member an opportunity to bring an issue or an opportunity. And what I have found, and I don't know what you have found, is I largely help facilitate, but I put my 2 cents in where I feel appropriate as well.
He's being very humble. You made a great suggestion to me, perhaps. The printed newspapers come out on Sundays and people look forward to it. Maybe you should consider something like that, and we are.
Right.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
Right.
But go ahead.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, Neil, is I think the power of this board is, and it's the theme of the title here, is 6 heads are better than one. So when one of the board members have brought up an issue, I have a few questions that may come up that we get clarified, and then I obviously jump to potential ideas or solutions that I have. But what I have found is how powerful some of these other solutions come out of other people's mouths that wasn't even on my radar. And I have self-reflected to just, how powerful that diverse thought is. I talk to a lot of business owners, and a lot of times I hear, well, I'm already on a a peer group in my industry. That's great, and they, I'm sure, bring a lot of value. But and I saw this in nuclear power often too, is largely we come from the same DNA, and you may get a little twist of thought and a little differing perspective from time to time, but it's largely in the same ballpark. What I find with these diverse people coming in from a sales background, from a marketing background, from a banking background, manufacturing background, the amount of diversity and thought that I hadn't even thought about is what really I think is the power of some of these peer-to-peer boards. And it's one of those, the adage, I don't know what I don't know. I get proven that every time that I go to one of these boards. And I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, that's so well said. And it's a strategy session. It's protected time. Share a little bit about what, if you meet with someone and you feel there's a good fit, what is a commitment of time?
Yeah, I said earlier in a podcast, we challenge business owners that how often do you work on the business versus in the business? And so one of our mantras is to try to teach the business owner the skill of the business can go on momentarily while you're working on the business. And that's what we view the board as doing. We meet once a month for 4 hours. We get right down to brass tacks, and we start talking issues and opportunities that the members bring to the table. In addition, then I do one-on-one coaching with the prospects that often mesh up with some of the things we've heard in the board, but often it is not the case, and we're going off doing some coaching that's outside of the board.
Might be work-life balance.
That's right. Right. And, common themes are family problems, and back up, family communication issues within the business. I can attest to that. I feel like communicating with my daughter and my new business with her, I find some differences that I'm having to work through that I didn't have when dealing with 1,000 people out at the plant.
Sure. Well,
and
you're the patriarch of the family, the boss, and now you're working together.
Yeah, but I didn't view it that way at the plant. I was just a part of a team, filling a role. However, the point is communicating with family members and the emotion that brings within a family business dynamic is different for me. And I recognize the challenges. And I'm just pointing out to listeners that certainly are business owners that I'm currently finding the communication in the family business more difficult in some cases than running a large organization.
I see. Sure.
Other things we talk about, exit strategy, how are you going to get out of this successful business that you've put together? That's obviously a very common theme, and just a lot of personnel issues.
Yes.
Lots of personnel issues that we talk about.
Yeah.
Hiring, development, thinking differently. Yeah, now with COVID, we certainly got this virtual concept from working from home. Yeah, it's almost daily that I'm hearing from business owners that I can't find people.
Right.
Or I hired someone on Monday and they didn't show back up on Tuesday. I mean, I wish to say that was a rare comment, but I hear it all the time.
Walk somebody through what the process might be to determine if they are a right fit. I know that they would meet with you initially.
Yeah, I've grown up being paid for performance, and I think TAB's no different. There's no contractual requirement. It's month to month, and so frankly, I would like for you to have a test drive with the board. In other words, we got current boards already ongoing. And before you sign up, I'd love for you to participate on a board. We'll sign the non-disclosure agreements and the formal confidential statements. But at the end of the day, I'd want you to come in and fully participate on one of the boards to see if it's a match. In some cases, it may not be the right match. Maybe it's just that, hey, they agreed to sit down with me and just do coaching only, which is fine. And I have some of those members, but clearly the board is something that's extremely, extremely valuable. And so I would, to your question, I would give them a test drive on the board, just let them try it out.
Great point. The other things I've learned, you mentioned sometimes you can be members of an organization, similar industries. Well, across the world with TAB, there's a way to connect. And for instance, there's someone in the digital publishing space that's in South Carolina that I'm starting to connect with. And
they're a TAB member.
And they're a TAB member,
right.
Yeah. And it may be the same if you happen to be involved in service industry or what have you. So I like the fact that it's local and they're local issues, but I like the fact that there's best practices.
Yeah. The other thing, I mean, we talk about the shared wisdom and diverse thought. That's clearly something that I think the board is very, that's the power of the board. I would tell you the other part is the accountability piece. Owners, like all of us, we like to do certain things and we don't like to do certain things. And sometimes those things that we don't like to do or don't want to do are the things that we need to do. And so I like to advertise that the board's equally strong at holding each other accountable. When you have peers that are at a previous board that you have committed to your peers that, hey, I'm going to go off and do this, and 30 days from now when we come back to the next board, I will have done X, Y, or Z. That gives some owners that accountability that they need just to go after some of the things that they may need to do, but not necessarily are doing.
Fair enough. That's a good place for us to wrap things. And to get started, to learn more, I might suggest that you go to tabcsra.com to fully take a look at everything. And of course, they've been nationally in business now for more than 30 years.
Oh, yeah. I one of the stories I like telling is there's a Hilton Head tab operation. First board was established in the 2003-2004 time frame. Their original members on that board were 9, and 4 of the 9 are still there. And, talking to them, they are extremely cohesive, extremely tight, and just what you would expect out of a trusted peer group advisory board.
Yeah. 6 heads are better than 1. Take it from me. It's true. Can't do it all by yourself. You have to have the help of others. Takes a village, doesn't it?
Well, that's right. And I would even argue, and maybe 7 heads or 8 heads may even be better than 6.
Yeah,
but the point is that you get a lot of wisdom from other people that answers the question that you may not have the knowledge of even asking.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to so many more topics on culture and hiring and employees and so much more, family businesses. We've just kind of scratched the surface. Thanks, Darin. I appreciate it and look forward to the weeks and months ahead.
I really enjoyed this, Neil. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us on the ABD Leadership Podcast, presented by Augusta Business Daily, Crosslink Consulting Services, TAB CSRA, and Best Office Solutions.